The purpose of this screencast is to generate questions about your topic. We are in the A, or Ask Questions phase of the research process, which is right at the beginning. And so you're developing a big list of questions. And throughout your research, your goal will be to answer these questions. And it will take you in the specific directions you want to go. So asking questions is a really good way to start a research project. Specifics about this assignment, so this is an overview and directions. You're going to familiarize, so purpose is you're going to familiarize yourself with your topic. I did Dred Scott, so I'm going to use kind of a basic article or reading to wrap my head around Dred Scott. The purpose of this exercise is to support students' efforts to develop and list questions about your topic. So when we're done with this process, you're going to have a whole bunch of questions to pursue even further research about your topic. So hopefully I have a bunch of questions now when this is done left unanswered, so I need to do more research on Dred Scott. Finally, the purpose of this exercise is to help students better comprehend the text they are reading. Asking questions while you read is an excellent way to comprehend what you're reading. Good readers ask questions while they read. Learnings. Students will be able to generate a list of questions before, during, and after reading a text. This is the big goal here, and this is what you're going to have. So directions. Now I'm going to step out of this to show you things as I go through the directions. So you'll see me clicking through different screens. Students will watch a think aloud of their teacher using the question generator. That's what you're watching right now. And so this is going to give you a sense of how to use this question generator. Next, students will locate their topic on MNOpedia and print the text to create a hard copy. So I went on MNOpedia and I printed a copy of the article on Dred Scott. And it looks like this. And so you're doing the same. You're going to find your topic on MNOpedia and then you're going to print it so you have a hard copy to work with. It's always good to use a hard copy first before doing online research so you can get a sense of what your topic is, and you also get a sense of what websites are good to use and which ones you probably don't want to use, especially if you use a good reliable source first. Before reading, so students will write down a minimum of 5 questions about their topic. You're going to get a handout like this: before reading, during reading, after reading, and then a couple questions down here. So I'm going to fill this up before I even read, and I got to have a minimum of 5 questions about what I think I want to know about my topic, and these can be pretty basic. And then that's going to guide my reading when I go into it. During reading, students will use the information in the text to come up with more questions, and a minimum of 5. So while you're reading, you're going to come up with a minimum of 5 questions that your brain's going to be turning while you read. You write those down here. After reading, students will write a minimum of 5 or more questions that the reading left unanswered. So that's going to be here. You're going to write down questions that you still have about your topic. Then you're going to answer just this one question down here. What do you understand now that you didn't understand before? And so something that really stuck in your mind. I went into this thinking this about Dred Scott or not knowing this, and now I know this. So that's for my particular topic. So, let's get started. Before I even read the article, I need to ask questions. And so I came up with a list of questions, and they're usually pretty basic at the beginning. When was Scott born? I hope that the article answers this. Where was Scott born? Was Scott an enslaved person? I don't know. Was he enslaved or was he free? What is Scott's connection to Minnesota? So I'm interested. What is his connection to Minnesota? Why Dred Scott in Minnesota? I typically don't associate Dred Scott with Minnesota, but apparently there's a connection. And then, why is Scott an influential person? So really, I want to know a lot more about Scott. So hopefully I can answer all these questions while I read. And also while I'm reading, I'm going to find out when he was born and where he was born. I'm going to find out his connection to Minnesota and find out if he was enslaved. I'm going to find out why he is influential. So I wrote these 5 questions down first. Now I'm ready to jump into during the reading. So I'm going to take myself to the reading. And it's good to preview the reading quick. This is MNOpedia, good reliable source. It's got an author, Annette Atkins. This is regularly updated source. Looking at this, I see it's Dred and Harriet Scott. I'm assuming these two are married. Remember, I don't know much about my topic yet. And I can see that this looks like a little intro because the text is a little different. And there's not much more to it, just paragraphs and several of them. So I'm going to get started. And as I have questions, I'm going to fill in my question guide. African Americans Dred Scott and Harriet Robinson Scott lived at Fort Snelling in the 1830s as enslaved people. There's my answer. He's enslaved, but I already have a question. What brought them to Fort Snelling? Okay, back to my article. Both the Northwest Ordinance and the Missouri Compromise prohibited slavery in the area, but slavery existed there even so. In the 1840s, the Scots sued for their freedom, arguing that having lived in free territory made them free. The 1857 Supreme Court decision that grew out of their suit moved the U.S. closer to civil war. So I have a question. Why was slavery tolerated in free territory? It seemed to be that they were okay with enslaved people being up in the north or in free territory. Also, I have another question. What is the Northwest Ordinance? I don't know what that is. So I may need to search that out. Already I got 3 questions and I haven't even read that much yet. The Scots were among the enslaved people taken by their army owners to Fort Snelling in the 1830s. The U.S. Army supported slavery there by allowing its presence and by paying a supplement to employ servants, including enslaved people. So I have an answer to my question of why slaves were allowed up there. It was a military ordinance or a military law. U.S. Indian agent Lawrence Taliaferro owned Harriet Robinson. Army surgeon John Emerson, not previously a slave owner, purchased Dred Scott in St. Louis. So we got some tie to St. Louis. The pre-statehood community in the 1830s, 1840s included enslaved and free blacks, a larger number of white army personnel and fur traders, and still larger population of mixed-race people. So, wow, it's a pretty diverse place, Minnesota at the time. The majority of population was Dakota and Ojibwe. This diversity, along with the absence of a cash crop economy, made for more fluid race dynamics than elsewhere in the United States. I got a question now. Why was Minnesota seem so diverse? In addition, enslaved people exercised greater independence and freedom of association than was common in the plantations south. So they seemed to have a little bit more freedom when they were in the north. Like all enslaved people, those at the fort were owned as property. Even so, Dred Scott earned independent income. He and Harriet Robinson married, lived together, and formed a family. I wonder if did living in the North allow Scott to get married and earn money? Okay, so I got a bunch of questions already, which is good. When the Army reassigned Emerson to the South The Scots eventually joined him. For a time, they lived at Fort Jessup in Louisiana. In 1838, they returned to Fort Snelling via St. Louis. Eliza, the first of the couple's daughters, was born during this trip. Their second daughter, Lizzie, arrived around 1846. Though Eliza was born in free territory, Lizzie was not. Are their kids enslaved? I wonder. Another question. After Emerson's death in 1843, his widow, Irene Sanford, assumed ownership of the Scots. She rejected Scott's attempts to buy freedom for himself and his family. So he earned money, so he's trying to buy his freedom, leaving them afraid that they would be sold and separated. And I know that that's a big deal, that a lot of people, that families were torn apart by the practice of slavery. Supported by abolitionists and inspired by court precedents, including the Missouri Court's 1836 decision to free a woman named Rachel based on her residence at Fort Snelling, the Scots pursued their case. They brought suits in a Missouri court in 1846 and 1847, then filed in federal court in 1853, while trying to keep themselves and their daughters out of harm's way. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney handed down the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in 1857. In Scott versus Sanford, the court decided that African Americans, enslaved and free, were not citizens within the meaning of the Constitution. Therefore, the Scots had no right to sue. It further ruled that slave owners could take their property anywhere, thereby declaring that Congress could not determine what was free territory. So slavery was allowed in those territories called free. What if everybody moved up there with their enslaved people? So what if a lot of people moved up with their enslaved people? Wouldn't that turn it wouldn't necessarily be a free place anymore? See, I got a bunch of questions forming. In addition to denying the rights of African Americans, the decision contributed directly to the sectional fury already inflamed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Bloody Kansas, and the Fugitive Slave Laws. I don't know what those are, so I'd probably ask questions about those too, but I'm going to finish up the reading. It nullified the Missouri Compromise and Northwest Ordinance. So these laws that were made, this court case nullified them, made them so that they didn't make any sense anymore. It strengthened the new Republican Party and helped elect Abraham Lincoln in 1860. So, wow, this is a pretty influential court decision involving Dred Scott. So there are my questions about why it's influential right here. Look at all the things it changed for the course of the country. It challenged the American nation's idea of itself as a free country. The decision also strengthened divisions in Minnesota. From the 1840s, Minnesota was home to fervent abolitionists. Its vibrant tourist economy catered to a summer population of slaveholders. After Scott versus Sanford, local abolitionists both pushed for laws to declare black men citizens and helped enslaved people escape. So that's a cool influence that the Dred Scott case had, is that it pushed a lot of abolitionists living in Minnesota to either help those enslaved people brought there from their southern owners because they were there to vacation in the summertime when it was too hot in the South. So it gave grounds, or kind of gave a task for abolitionists to pursue their cause. Minnesota joined other northern states in adopting personal liberty laws that protected African Americans brought into free territory. So it also made Minnesota change its laws to protect those African Americans brought into this territory. The new anti-slavery Republican Party took deep root in Minnesota. So Minnesota became a place where that was pushed, where abolitionist movement kind of found an anchor or a hook. Ultimately, the Scots secured their freedom. Taylor Blow a previous owner of Dred Scott who helped fund the cases and employed the Scotts during their suits, purchased the Scott family and set them free just before Scott's death in 1858. Harriet and her daughters stayed in St. Louis. She worked as a laundress until her death in 1876. So I can see Scott died in 1858, his wife died in 1876, and this guy, Taylor Blow, bought them and then freed them. So kind of cool that it turned out that way in the end. So pretty influential court case. So now I'm going to go back to my questions. I've finished my reading. I still have a lot more questions to ask. So I'm just going to ask a couple here. I still don't know when Scott was born or where he was born. So I need to pursue that in further research. I also want to know, how did Minnesota become a place for abolitionists to carry out their actions? Seems like Minnesota became kind of a hotbed for it after that court case. Also, how did the outcome of the case overrule the Missouri Compromise? That's a pretty big deal. So it changed the course of a law that was made. So I could also ask a lot more questions, but already I got a bunch of questions that I can pursue in my research and further research. So then down here is, what do you understand now that you didn't understand before? I did not understand how influential Scott's case was to developing the abolitionist movement in MN, or in Minnesota. And then you don't need to do this question down here. You cross this one out. So, I've now asked questions before, during, and after. I found out something that I went in not knowing and learned about it. And I'm able now to familiarize myself with my topic of Dred Scott. So you're going to do this same process.